I was actually teaching at Vanderbilt. So the last 12 years, I've been a associate professor and the director of undergraduate business for Vanderbilt. And I had a class called Leading Business Through Times of Crisis. And I had different guest speakers that would come in. I often tell people when I'm talking about it, like an example. So one example was we had Doug Parker, who was the CEO of American Airlines, and Sarah Nelson, the president of Flight Attendants Association. They came into class together and they talked about labor and management dealing with crisis. And every week we had different guests. And one week was James Patterson because Patterson got his master's in English literature from Vanderbilt. So he was kind enough to do the class. And he started off with the students. Actually, this audience will appreciate it. First, he said to the students, "Hi, I'm Stephen King," which is a pretty funny opening line. And then he said, "No, I'm James Patterson." He said, "I want to ask you, are you living a good life?" And then he let it take a beat. And he said, "I hope you are. But I don't, what I hope you aren't feeling like is you're on one treadmill to get on another treadmill to get on another treadmill." He goes, "I'm living a good life, and here's how I went about doing it." And then he shared with them kind of the ups and downs of his career. He shared with them that he was in advertising and how he disrupted the hiring process to get that initial job. And then he became the CEO of J. Walter Thompson North America. He wrote the tagline, "I'm a Toys R Us kid," all that part. And then he quit it to focus on writing. And he also shared with them some personal loss that he had and what he learned through that process as well. And by the time it was over, I was like, wow, this is interesting. This is a guy who is a disruptive force. He's disrupted publishing, multiple authors, multiple genres. And he's also a guy who, like all of us, has dealt with some really tough things as well. He's also a really good storyteller. I'm interested in studying just a research project on how do some people deal with the curveballs in life. The unexpected twists and turns at life, the good and the bad, and look for them as not just, oh my gosh, this thing happened to me and it blew everything up, but look at it and say, okay, this happened to me. I wasn't expecting it. It's not great, or it is great, or whatever I feel about it, but what can I do with this thing? So I approached him and I asked him if he'd be willing to write a book with me on it. And initially, he was not that interested initially, not because it wasn't a good idea. It was my pitch was terrible. But then I came back around and we built some rapport over the course of the semester. I came back around and made I think, a better argument about why it made sense to do it and how it fit into what he was doing. And we went from there. So after that, we agreed to do it. I remember he called me up. I had a meeting scheduled with him. It was on a Thursday morning in July several years ago. And the Thursday prior to that, so a week early, at the exact same time, my son and I are driving in Colorado, and my phone rings, and I look down, and it says James Patterson. I'm like, oh shoot, did I have the day wrong? All of a sudden, I'm like, I was expecting to be in front of my computer and like do this like a pro. And I pick up the phone. He's like, "Hey Patrick, this is Jim." And I said, "Hey Jim, what's going on?" And he said, "I heard you want to get together and have a meeting next week." And I'm like, "Yeah, next week, yeah." He's like, "Nah, we don't need to have the meeting. Let's do the project." So once I had a good argument and a compelling argument, and I had already built rapport with him, I think at that point he saw how it made sense. Then we got into the outline writing, which is uh, a big project. The first outline I wrote, because I'd known that he wrote long outlines, and maybe he shared with you that in his first book, I think his outline ended up being a few hundred pages. So I was like, okay, you're doing your research. You're like, okay, this partner likes long outlines. I'm going to write a long outline. And it was 37 pages, which is a pretty decent outline. And it just completely missed the mark. He called me up. He's like, "Yeah, this is not it, blah, 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 blah." He's like, "This needs to feel like no other book on the shelf around in business or in self-help." And I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what does that even mean? And so I went back to the drawing table, as they say, and worked out it again. And dude, I wrote the most book that felt like no other book on the shelf. It was like dark. There's no hope. It's like disruption is going to get you type of thing. And that one missed too. So then I figured I had one more good shot at this because we were joking and working on it together. And the third outline, I really stepped back and worked on it for months. I didn't feel rushed. I just took my time to do it. And we went back and forth on that third outline a bit. And then one day he called me up and goes, "Yeah, we got it now. This is it." So that was about 10 months in at that point before we really got the outline nailed down. So some of it we didn't quite know yet at the time of the outline, just because we were going to launch a research project. It was going to fill in a lot of the details, but we had some early on hypotheses about how we thought this was going to play out. But essentially, what Disrupt Everything and Win is this idea that inside all of us is a fire burning inside of us. You could call it your purpose, you could call it your why. We chose to call it a fire. And we said your fire is based upon what you're passionate about, what you're talented at, and what your conscience is telling you is a gap in the world that needs to be closed. And if you can align those three things, so I might be passionate about writing, I might feel like the world needs a good writer, but I might not be talented at it. That might not be my particular fire inside. But if I can line them up, like I'm passionate about this, I'm talented at it, and the world needs my voice in it, type of thing. There's a gap to be closed. So if I get clear on my fire inside, the question then becomes, when disruptions come to me, is it possible that those disruptions, good or bad, even the most horrific things, could possibly be fueled to throw on that fire? So I could say, maybe I lost that job or that project didn't work out or whatever, but is there something fertile here that I can build on that's going to help me to throw fuel on that fire? We decided early on that that whole fire inside concept has been written about a lot. I mean, like start with why and let's see, purpose-driven life on the Christian side, and there's been a lot of writing about it. So we didn't spend a lot of time like saying you need to define your purpose, other than giving a chapter to the idea and a tool in the back of the book to help people do that. We spent the other 32 chapters of the book saying, all right, what do we know? What do we know about disruptions in life? What are some fundamental facts about them? And how could we look at how people deal with disruption? So the initial outline, we were making an argument of how we thought it was going to play out, but then it launched into, I ran a 2.5 year project sponsored by Vanderbilt, studying positive disruptors in the world. So that allowed us to really kind of go, okay, this wasn't right in the outline, because now that we've studied it with more people's perspective than just our own, we start to learn what happens. But yeah, that's what the book's about how do you deal with these things. As far as some broad brush ideas that are in the final copy, um, we talk about 4 fundamental facts about disruption. Really quickly, the first one is the status quo is a deceptive little devil. If you like things the way they are, folks, enjoy the moment. They're going to change. And trying to hang on to things just the way they are is kind of a fool's errand. Secondly, it's okay that things change because you're wired to disrupt. You got a big brain. You got cool experiences in your life that have taught you how to get over obstacles, and you have resources, even when you feel like you don't. The third thing is third fundamental fact is relationships in life provide headwinds and tailwinds. Some relationships in life are blowing from behind, they're tailwinds and they're pushing you forward, and others are wind in your face. And you need to hit that directly and think about that. And also, what are you doing to other people? And then the fourth fundamental fact is your time here is finite. Make it count in ways that matter. So your time listening to this conversation today, your time with your family in its current configuration, your time with your job or whatever it might be, your time with the project you're working on right now, your time on planet Earth is finite. Let's make it count. So we lay out those 4 fundamental facts, and then from there we go, okay, what's the process that tends to play out when people deal with disruption, and how can we use people's stories to help teach the ideas? In the research piece, if you're in those who are into research, it's a mixed methods research in that there's qualitative to it. There was 350 long form interviews, each of which, you have to go through the process of interviewing somebody for an hour and a half or 2 hours, getting the transcript, culling through the transcript, looking for patterns. And then there was also a quantitative piece with survey instruments, just to see if we're getting the terms right and the organizational structure right, and to confirm some things we heard in the interviews. But one story that really stood out to me was this guy named Tom Dieri. And I think he's a really good example it's early on in the book, but it's a good example. So of the 350 interviews, about 35 of the stories come into the book. And every chapter starts with a story, and every story is fast. It's a James Patterson book, right? So every story is fast. Every chapter moves pretty quick, because we want people to keep moving. And Jim and I were pretty early on. He said, and I agreed, it's like, you know what, if a story doesn't resonate with somebody, skip it. Go on to the next one, reader. We don't, sometimes the story really connects with you and sometimes it doesn't. That's okay. Just skip. And if you've got this part of your life figured out, then skip it. Move on to the next thing. I love that way of saying, like, here's how to read this book. But so there's a guy named Tom Dieri. When Tom was 22 years old, he was graduating college, and he had big dreams. He was going to go to Manhattan, work in some high paying consulting type of job. And that's what he saw himself doing. But at the same time, as he was 22, Tom has a younger brother named Andrew, and Andrew's 20 at the time. And Andrew's on the autism spectrum. And Tom goes home at Thanksgiving and he's talking to his family. His dad's concerned about, what's Andrew going to do in life? What's the future for Andrew look like? How's he going to have a really good life himself? And Tom was concerned too. Tom ended up going to Andrew's school for a few days just to experience, what is Andrew learning? What type of things could Andrew do in life? And by the time that was over, he was disrupted. He's like, I'm not going to go do that job. I'm going to do something with my brother. So they ended up opening a car wash. So by the time we went down and interviewed him, Tom is now 35. They have 3 car washes in South Florida. They have 100 employees across the 3 car washes. 90 of them are on the autism spectrum. And guess what? Their places are more productive and more profitable than other car washes. And it was just a really interesting story about a guy who was disrupted by a conversation with his dad and then visiting his brother's school. And he said, okay, what can I do with this? I don't know anything about car washes. I don't know about leading a team of employees on the autism spectrum, but I'm going to figure this out because I do know that part of my fire inside is caring about my brother. And it's just a really cool story. And it's an example of sometimes you have a plan in life, but maybe the path isn't the right path for you. And when I interviewed him, so I went down and interviewed him. I went down, and Jim and I met down in Florida, and then I went over and did this particular interview. And I remember I've never worked at a car wash. So other than going to a car wash and sending my car through the car wash, I'd never been inside anything beyond the little break area where you get the cup of coffee. But there's another room adjacent to this, and inside that room is their office and their storage area and lots of furniture and lots of stuff. It's crowded in there. And I sat down, that's where I interviewed him. And when I was walking out of the interview, I just happened to, sometimes the best question, the last question you ask. And I just turned around and I saw Tom sitting there in a red polo shirt in the middle of a car wash. And I just thought, that's a guy who wanted to go make big money in New York City 13 years ago. And I just said, hey, Tom, what would your 22-year-old self say if he saw your 35-year-old self wearing a red polo sitting in a car wash right now? And he said, he would say, I'm in the exact right place. So the book is full of stories like that that help move you along in some thinking about how you can turn disruptions into opportunities. So we get into the book a little bit later on in the book, we get into the idea of like disrupting yourself, disrupting your relationships, disrupting your family, disrupting your industry, disrupting society. Two guys that we interviewed for disrupting your industry are Andy Katz Mayfield and Jeff Rader, who are the founders of a company called Harry's Shave. And Jeff Rader also founded a company called Warby Parker. And Andy tells us this story about how he was going into a convenience store to get some razor blades. He was traveling on a business trip and he forgot his razor. And anybody who's ever been in those experiences knows that, guess what? The razor blades are like behind a locked case. You've got to find somebody to open it up because they're high theft items. They're crazy expensive. And as he said, the packaging on them is like all futuristic and all this. He said, like, I didn't even connect with it. I'm just trying to get my shave for the thing. So he goes, I walked out and I felt like I got kind of ripped off in that experience because I spent $30 on a couple of razor blades. So he reached out to his friend Jeff Rader, who had already started Warby Parker. He said, I've got an idea to sell razors differently. And they went through the subscription model and literally disrupted that industry. I mean, Gillette changed some of their pricing and everything based upon Harry Shave. And now Harry Shave is a $2 billion business. So that's another example of, somebody walking in and just getting a quick disruption. Yeah. And it changes everything.
That's
And then there's
the
yeah, go
razor
ahead.
company I use.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Yeah, that's where it started at. Like they walked into a convenience store and the rest is legendary from there. And then one thing that we really thought, and this is Patterson's major influence on this was, and I think it was such a right, he's got a good gut instinct. It was a right gut instinct is that we need to lean more and more into relationships in life because there's a lot of people, that question about are you living a good life? There's a lot of people where will answer that with, I'm getting by, hanging in there. And a lot of it comes down to the relationships in their life just aren't that good. They're not as good as they could be. And I told him, well, what I told him was that I told Patterson that I had been out. One thing we decided in the process of writing and researching this, he encouraged me to go out and just talk to audiences on the topic. You were talking about earlier about talking to audiences. So I had a chance early on. It was kind of crazy. We were still in the outline phase of trying to figure this thing out, and I step on stage in front of 800 people to tell them what we're learning about disruption. So I mean, there was like that type of thing going on. And after every time we go out and talk, we get on the phone. He's like, "What'd you learn from it? What were people interested in? What was connecting with the audience?" And I said, there's a story I just happened to share about my mom and dad with this group, and it really seemed to resonate with them. And he's like, he just encouraged me. He's like, "Oh, go out and tell that story more, see what happens." And the story goes like this. When I was, this is probably like about 38, 39 years old, my wife and I, we have 2 kids. At the time, they were teenagers. And I noticed a pattern had kind of fallen into place. I would call my parents once a week, kind of honestly out of obligation. It was just a call your mom and dad once a week, then you check in. They lived in Chicago, which is where I grew up at. At the time, I was living in Louisville, Kentucky. And I just thought about like my relationship with my parents isn't that great. It's not bad. It's just it's transactional. I said, could it be better? So I just started doing some little things. Like they raised five kids. I'm the youngest of five kids. We had two kids at the time, still do. And I thought, they probably know something about raising kids. So instead of doing the normal call home, what's the weather, what's the traffic like, what's on your task list this week, I'd call home with a couple of questions prepped, like, hey, our son's dealing with this, or our daughter asked us about that. What would you say? Type of thing. And when I traveled for work, I would send them postcards, just a couple little things. And after a period of time, I noticed the relationship started getting better. So then one day I'm traveling for work and I'm going through Dallas, Texas. And I land in Dallas, Texas. I turn my cell phone on after the plane lands. And the message on the phone says, hey, give me a call. And it was one of my brothers. I call my brother and he says, you need to come home. Mom's gotten, her illness has gotten worse. I said, okay, no problem. I'll come home. I said, let me finish this business trip I'm on. I'll fly back to Louisville. My wife and I will get together. We'll drive up to Chicago. He said, no, you need to come home right now. So I got right back on that same plane I just got off of because it was going right back, and grabbed my wife. We drove up to Chicago. We got to my parents' house, and if you've ever heard that story about somebody who's passing away or dying is like waiting for the last person to come, I was the last person. I was the last person of the five siblings to show up. My mom rallied for a couple of hours, and then she passed away. And the next few days are dealing with someone passing away and planning funerals and doing all those type of things you don't do in your most of us don't do in our daily lives. And it's kind of just this awkward time, doesn't really have any meaning at that moment, just kind of blurry. And after it's all over with, after the funeral, we go back to now what is my dad's house. And I'm sitting there with my wife at my dad's house, and everybody's just awkward and uncomfortable because literally someone's missing, and it just feels weird. And you're eating the tray of cold cut sandwiches, and I said to my wife, I'm so glad that I was disrupted. I didn't have the language at the time, but that's what I would say now. I was disrupted when I really thought about my relationship with my parents and I chose to do something different. And she said to me, you're still a son. And I look across the room and there's my dad. And my dad is the no guy, and my mom was the yes lady in my life. Like if I wanted to go do something with friends, I asked mom, not dad. If I thought something would be fun to get, I'd ask mom, not dad. And so I kind of saw my dad that way. So I figured, oh, great, I'm going to go over and say something to my dad, and it's not going to go well. And I walk over to my dad and I said, hey, dad, I travel a lot for work these days. Do you want to go with me? Fully expecting him to say no and be able to go back to my wife and say, see, I tried. And instead of saying no, he said, where are you going? And I'm like, I'm going to Topeka, Kansas next week. And my dad goes to Topeka, Kansas with me. Then he goes to Florida with me. And he sees me present and he sees me work with clients and he sees me in a completely different light. And guess what? I see him in a completely different light because he's not the no guy. He's the guy on the south side of Chicago with like three jobs to hold down and raise five kids. He's got a lot going on. And now he's 94 years old, and my mom's been gone for 14 years, and our relationship is just so much different. So I would just share like that story or part of that story on stage, and it really resonates. That's the story that Patterson and I decided to keep in the book. So it's actually in the book about disrupting your family. And I guess the takeaway for that is if you have somebody in your life where you need to text them or reach out, your time here is finite. Make it count in ways that matter.